Bro, housing is so expensive. Why does an apartment the size of 4 parking spots cost over $2,000 a month to rent? And why does this 100-year-old house cost over $1 million? Is it because of Californians? Tech bros? Hipsters? Boomers? Just looking around, everyone has their own personal scapegoat to blame for our housing crisis. But everyone is right that rising housing costs is a problem. More than anything, the rise in the cost of housing has been correlated with the rise of homelessness in the United States, meaning that the cities and counties with the highest housing costs tend to have higher rates of homelessness. And with housing being the biggest expense for most Americans, this is making life expensive as hell to live. This has consequences on people's quality of life too, as higher housing cost burdens tend to lead to lower life satisfaction. So who do we have to blame for all of this? I think a good place to start is by looking at who is charging these prices. Have you ever considered who owns the buildings in your city? Like who owns Smith Tower in Seattle? So this is where our first boogeyman steps in. GT Capital owns Smith Tower, and it's a real estate holding company. What these real estate companies do is acquire and hold real estate, like office buildings or apartments, with the goal to make money, usually through the appreciation of these assets and through income streams like rent. Real estate companies and real estate investors own much of the large buildings in a city. These companies usually don't produce any goods or provide services. They make money by owning the buildings that you work and live in. It's in their financial interest to make sure that rent and asset values keep going up. Let me break down an example of how these real estate companies rob you guys. One of the companies that I shit-talked in the past is Vulcan Real Estate. They played a large role in the land development in the city of Seattle, mainly with the redevelopment of the South Lake Union neighborhood. They developed and owned multiple residential and commercial buildings in Seattle, but they contracted out some of the property management to different companies like Greystar Real Estate Partners. Greystar used a property management software from the company RealPage to aid them in pricing the residential rents in buildings. One of the responsibilities that property managers have is to collect and settle rent from tenants. And if this name sounds familiar, well, it's because they're being sued by the Department of Justice for an algorithmic pricing scheme, with Greystar being one of the real estate companies listed as being in on the scheme. They are accused of using software to coordinate rent prices among landlords. This scheme comes at a cost for renters. In fact, if you live in Atlanta, it might have costed you an additional $181 a month on average. The need for new housing units is important to combat the housing crisis, but if real estate companies like this are at the helm of developing and managing their ever-growing portion of the housing supply, then I'm not so sure if they're the right ones to help us. Giving corporations the key to the city might not be a good thing. However, NIMBYs are also known for using their influence to cause harm in their own ways. NIMBY, an acronym for Not in My Backyard, is a term to describe people who oppose infrastructure and real estate developments in their neighborhood. This can be used for good, like protesting against oil pipelines that would pollute your local drinking water, or being against new highways that would demolish and break apart your neighborhood. But unfortunately, some NIMBYs are manifesting into curmudgeons that try to stop trivial or even good changes from happening. Do you want to turn some old tennis courts into new pickleball courts? Nope, no pickleball for you if the NIMBYs can't help it. Sorry nerds. Do you want to make a street next to a park safer? Too bad. The NIMBY resistance to new things of course also applies to housing. The city of Seattle and the rest of King County have been steadily growing in population for years. So that means building more things like houses. What you can build in your city is determined by something called a zoning map, where each zone sets a limit on what you can build. For most cities, the majority of the map only allows for single-family homes, which is characterized by a light tan color. This can be a problem in a city with a growing population, because most of the land in city limits already have something on them. So the main way of building new housing ends up redeveloping existing properties into denser housing. But because the majority of the land in cities are zoned for single-family homes, this means that development pressure gets hyper-concentrated into the zones where multifamily buildings, like apartments, are allowed. This constraint makes the land on these multifamily zones expensive, because real estate vultures can see that there's money to be made from everyone moving into the city, so they build up quickly in the zones where it is allowed. So, how do NIMBYs play a part in this? Well, cities recognize that if they are growing in population, they need to accommodate accordingly, so they redraw the zoning maps to allow for more housing for new residents. The idea is that by adding more multifamily zones, there will be more places where you can build denser housing like apartments, townhouses, and the like to house more people. This is called upzoning. Where NIMBYs come to play is when places in wealthier neighborhoods are upzoned, often with complaints fearing impacts to the quality of life and neighborhood character. The City of Seattle recently released their recent drafts for some zoning changes in their One Seattle Comprehensive Plan, and the change.org petitions started flooding in. Seattle City Council member Kathy Moore, who lives in Maple Leaf, initially showed support for Alternative 5, one of the alternatives in the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, which is the most aggressive in terms of upzoning out of all the available options. However, as the comprehensive plan draft came in, she suddenly was against the upzoning in her neighborhood. She became skeptical of how density could be used to solve our housing crisis and shifted to blaming developers and urbanists. She also throws some shade on luxury townhouses, you know, the kind of housing that is cheaper than a single family house, and consider a property that was once one homeowner to now 7 homeowners, while also lamenting at the possibility of her children not being able to own a home in the future. But what she doesn't consider is that it doesn't stop real estate capitalists from making a profit. They just double down their effect onto denser urban communities, which happen to be where most renters live. Renters are generally younger, less wealthy, and more racially diverse. All things Kathy Moore is not. So by trying to protect people who live in homes like these, she is selling away people who live in homes like these to developers. Property redevelopments also affect renters worse than homeowners. Homeowners get a nice payout when they sell their house to developers, while renters just lose their home. Redeveloping existing apartments is also more expensive, because a whole apartment building is going to cost more to buy and destroy than a couple of houses. And these costs of construction are definitely going to get passed on to the next person who rents. I know corporate greed has been shitted on quite a bit, but have you also considered that individuals could use the same methods as corporations to enrich themselves? Maybe you know a guy who has an Airbnb, or a coworker renting out their condo, or maybe just a relative who just wants to see their property values go up. Individuals make up a big chunk of the landlords in the states, and their actions also contribute to the cost of housing. NIMBYs blocking upzoning in their neighborhood ends up making their community more exclusive, even if they're well-intentioned in protecting their neighborhood from big business. Many of them are also homeowners who would benefit from this exclusivity through rising property values caused by housing scarcity. This can be seen as a way for NIMBYs to protect their property values. But it's not just about the money. If I were being uncharitable, it's also a way for keeping certain people away from their neighborhood. Queen Anne is full. It's tapped out. There are other places close to downtown. Rainier Valley, White Center, and density can go there instead. Either way you cut it, the use of housing as an investment for profit and the use of low density zoning to gatekeep neighborhoods is driving the cost of rent and home prices up. Whether it's anti-competitive price fixing schemes, price gouging, or blocking new housing. So what's the alternative to getting housing from a corporation, a real estate bro, or a boomer? I finally got to the part that I wanted to talk about in the first place. Public housing, specifically social housing. Public housing is housing that is owned and managed by the government, often provided for low-income residents at affordable rents. Social housing is a type of public housing because it's publicly owned, but where it differs is the incomes of the residents that live there. While public housing in the States is mainly reserved for low-income residents, social housing offers housing at a broader range of incomes, including people who make middle income. The reason why this is important is because public housing in the States has been underfunded for years through austerity and neoliberal policies that make it difficult to maintain or expand public housing. How social housing can get around these austerity measures is by allowing people making higher incomes to live there as well. Here in Seattle, voters approved of Initiative 135 to create a social housing developer, and on the initiative, it allows people making up to 120% of area median income, or AMI, to live in social housing. Rents in social housing are capped at 30% of income, but for a household of one making between 80 to 120% AMI, these rent caps are actually in line with market rate rents for studios and one-bedroom apartments. But instead of the surplus revenue going to landlords, real estate holding companies, and property managers as profit, that money goes towards supplementing the rents of lower income residents making below 80% AMI. This makes social housing a more financially sustainable kind of public housing in a country hell-bent on privatizing everything. But how does this help with our cost of housing? Well, for people making below 80% median income, it provides an affordable rent based on your income that's hard to find on the private market. And for people making above 80% AMI, social housing can compete with the private market, giving renters more choice when looking for housing. Social housing can also fill in some supply gaps that the private market is not good at covering, mainly the family part of multifamily housing. Seattle tops the ranks for the amount of single-room housing in the city, and a large reason why is that many new developments mainly build studios and one-bedroom units. However, these kinds of housings do not meet the needs of a family with children. Public projects generally include a larger range of housing sizes to accommodate for a bigger range of households. Let's look at some real-life examples in Yesler Terrace. Red Cedar is a public housing development and it offers a wide range of housing sizes with more 3-bedroom units than 1-bedroom units. The building also includes amenities that are rare for urban apartments in America, like a private courtyard with a playground for children, and housing units designed to reduce asthma triggers. Social housing could emulate the public housing found in Yesler Terrace by including some of these amenities in their properties. This kind of housing is a way for families to stay in the city comfortably while paying a price that they can afford, so they don't need to buy a $1 million house or move out into the boonies. This February, the City of Seattle will be voting on Proposition 1A, which is a payroll tax to fund social housing. Employers will pay a marginal payroll tax of 5% on each employee with a compensation of over $1 million. That 5% only applies to income that's over $1 million a year, so this tax will mostly affect the corporations with high earners in Seattle. The funds from this tax will go directly to property acquisition, construction costs, and running the operations of social housing. The Seattle Mayor and City Council are trying to undermine this proposition because they represent corporate interests despite pretending not to be. They voted against putting the initial initiative on the ballot in November and added their own alternative this February election, which would take money from existing affordable housing to fund social housing. And of course their alternative is funded mostly by corporations. Social housing has been gaining traction across the United States, with many municipalities trying to emulate the social housing success of places like Vienna and Singapore. So if you live in Seattle, let's vote yes on Proposition 1A to bring social housing into reality.
Genocidal war in Gaza and the failure to address the worsening capital crisis in the U.S. A Trump win will not mean an end to U.S. wars and conflict overseas. How are y'all feeling about the election? Terrible! Yeah, fuck that! Fucking terrible! Fuck Trump! Fuck Trump!